What's up everyone, Jared with Ducky Customs bringing you a how-to video today. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the Arsenal Mod XB1 Remappable clipboard on the Xbox One controller, the new one with the 3.5mm jack and support. Before you get started, there's a few things you're going to need just for simple disassembly of the controller. That's going to be a T6, zoom that in there, a T6 Torx driver. If I can get it to focus here, T6 Torx driver, a T8 security driver, and basically what that is it's a T8 Torx head driver with a hole right there in the middle of it for a stud in the center of the screw, and a nylon pry tool. You can pick these up on the website, and I'd highly recommend you get that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to disassemble the controller. And just a real quick overview, this one's already been disassembled, but to show you where they're at, you're going to have 5 screws that you're going to have to remove from the rear of the controller. They're going to be 2 are going to be located under the left grip, 2 under the right grip, and 1 inside the battery compartment. I've went ahead and already taken these screws out to make the video a little quicker, but these will be the T8 Torx screws that you'll be removing. Remove 1 here, 2 on the other side, 1 inside the battery compartment there. And in order to pop these grips off, you'll just slide the pry tool down in the front here. What I like to do is kind of pop it up there, pop it up there. You can just kind of grab on the sides, pull it off. Sounds like it's going to rip apart, but not the case at all. After you've taken those screws out, faceplate will just slide right off. Next, you're going to remove your thumbsticks and just give those a gentle tug, and they'll pop right off. Then you'll want to pull your triggers in just a little bit like that, just a little bit there, and lift up on the front and out, and it'll pop right out of the rear shell there. And to get to your board, you're going to flip this over. I've gone ahead and desoldered the rumbles again to make it a little quicker on the video. Pop these rumbles out, and also note where these are. As you're looking at the bottom of the board like this, your small rumble will be on the left hand side and your larger rumble will be on the right hand side. After you've removed those, you have 2 screws to remove. These will be the T6 Torx screws. You'll have 1 right here in the corner, see if I can get that to focus in, and another one in the exact same location on the other side. After you remove those, you're going to want to pull this out. Now, it's kind of tough to get out, so I recommend going on the left hand side here, which is right here by your protective cover for the chipset, and just kind of grab the bottom and grab the top with fingers and kind of lift up on one side and just kind of work it back and forth, and it'll snap right out. Then you just lift it out like that. Now this is your 3.5mm headset jack, so you'll want to keep that, set that off to the side, and note how it goes in case you didn't and don't know how it goes. When you install it again, make sure your brass connectors there are facing up so that they will make contact with the contact points on your lower board. And after that, it's all done, it's all disassembled, and this is where the step you need to be in order to be able to install the Arsenal Mod XB1 clipboard. So we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so now that we have the controller disassembled here, we have the board, and I have it in a set of helping hands. If you don't have some, I highly recommend getting them. They make this job so much easier, incredibly easier. So I would highly recommend picking those up. You can usually pick them up at Radio Shack for about 20 bucks or so. Here you have the Arsenal Mod XB1 clipboard. And all you do to line it up, they will go over the J5 and J6 connectors here, and you'll see that they sit down. They actually line up really well. I'll zoom in here to see if we can give you a little bit of a closer look, reposition that into the camera to see how those line up there. Now, something I like to do, I actually made these up myself. They're just small alligator clips here, and what I've done is I've taken some, kind of ground the teeth off, taken some rubber. Also, you can buy these, use some electrical tape around them, things like that. As long as the metal isn't contacting the board, you're good on that. But I like to use these to clip this down into position so that when you solder it, it's not sticking up off the board. It's nice and flush with the board. and it just makes the install go a little bit easier. You're not having to really sit there and fight the height of it or anything like that. So that definitely makes the installation a whole lot easier. And next you're going to need, of course, a soldering iron. For those of you who don't have one, I run the Hakko FX650. Nice little soldering iron, and we'll zoom out so you can see it here. Nice little soldering iron, 35 bucks at HakkoUSA.com. Highly recommend this, not paid for or sponsored by them or anything like that, but excellent little soldering iron for 35 bucks. And I just used the factory tip that it came with, which I'm wanting to say is 1.5 millimeter conical tip, and it works just fine for this installation. All right. Okay, now that I've got this on here, made a couple of changes. Moved the clip over here to this corner. It wasn't quite sitting down flush like I wanted to, and repositioned this secondary clip right here as well. So next what you're going to want to do is get your soldering iron, get it hot, make sure your tip is good and clean, tinned, etc., etc. And what you're going to want to do, clean the tip there. What I like to do, first off, if you'll notice on each contact here, the white arrows that are on there, those are going to be the points in which you're going to be soldering to. You won't solder to any of the other points. It'll only be the ones with the white arrows on it on the J5 and J6 connector for this step of the installation. So what you're going to want to do is take the tip, tin it with just a little bit of solder, kind of helps the flow of it and everything, and you'll just go down there and dab a little on there and till it gets on there. Now, something you really want to make sure not to do, and this kind of comes with experience and stuff as well, is you want to try to avoid getting these contacts mixed up. You don't want them to touch each other. If you get the solder going across the contacts, it can definitely cause a little bit of a hassle trying to remove it in order to finish the installation. So after you've done that, here we'll reposition this here and see if we can do another one here. Okay, repositioned it here and soldered one on the other side so I can get that alligator clip out of the way for the next part of it, and show you again on this side here. What you'll do is just tin it slightly, and you'll very gently and delicately, if you will, because these are small contacts, so it definitely takes a bit of finesse in order to get these on there. I also extremely and highly recommend getting a smaller tip. This one works great, but a lot of your Radio Shack soldering irons and things like that are going to have too large of a tip to be able to do the fine work that you're going to be doing on this installation video. So I'm going to go ahead and solder the rest of these up, and we'll be right back. Okay, now that we have all those soldered together, what you're going to want to do is definitely look very closely, check each and every solder joint, make sure you have good contact, good adhesion to the contacts on your J5 and your J6 connector there. Now, after that's done, also, actually one thing, the rapid fire on this particular board for the new 3.5 controllers is kind of a cat and mouse type thing with the controller updates. Currently, it does not support the rapid fire on this particular board right now. It possibly will in the future. So, won't be covering that in this video. This third contact, if I can zoom in right there, you see the hollow triangle. Now that is the sync contact, and what that is for your rapid fire functionality. So when you are installing it just for the remap capabilities, you will not need to solder that particular connection, just the ones with the solid white triangles there. Okay, now after you've done that, that's when we get over here, and you'll see all these soldered connections. Now these come pre-tinned, which I really have to say, we build custom controllers and I absolutely love that. It's super nice and convenient having that already pre-tinned. As you go down, you'll notice it says switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4. Now the nice thing about these remap boards is you don't necessarily have to have your switches in order. This is something I do like to point out. I point out to my customers as well. If you have your upper left switch on switch 3 3, you have your upper right switch on switch 1. It's not going to matter as far as those contacts go, which are going to be your positive contacts on your switches themselves. At the bottom here, you'll notice there's the ground. Then you will have your B button here, your right thumbstick click, your left thumbstick click, and then down here is LED, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. That's for your LED indication on the how to remap it and to let you know when it's entered remap mode and that sort of thing. But we'll go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with the ground here. Now, where I like to run these, there's a couple of places you can run them. The way I prefer it is as you flip the board over, this contact right here on the back of your thumbstick is going to be the ground. This is typically where I run the ground for the board, and that's going to also ground out to all of your switches as well. That will be your switch ground there. So what I like to do is I will actually run a ground from here around the board and contact point right there. And then as your ground cables come around from off of your ground switches, you can loop them, which we'll show you how to do that later in the video. You can loop them around and you can splice them in and have everything connect right here on the ground connection on the board. So again, and that's going to be your left thumbstick. As you're holding it this way, it will be, or your right thumbstick rather, apologies. You'll flip it over and it will be this top contact right here. That will be the ground point for that. That's just typically what I go off of. There are a few more other ground points and everything, but that tends to be the quickest and easiest one there. Next, you're going to have your B button. Now on your J5 and J6 connectors here, each one of these represents a button. And what's really nice about these clipboards as opposed to just the chips themselves is that it reduces, if you'll look and count, 3 down here, 4 up there, 3 here, and 2 here. That reduces the wires you have to run to each individual contact on the board by a dozen wires. Extremely convenient when you're doing a lot of these installs. So here's your B, and what you're going to do is you're going to run a wire from that B over to the D14 connector. Now you'll notice there's 2 solder points on this. You're going to want to connect to the top solder joint, the very top one there, and when you are done you do not want them connecting, so make sure there is no soldered bridge between those and that it is nice and open there. So you'll run that. We'll install these here in just a little bit off camera to make it, you know, kind of a little bit easier, a little bit shorter of a video, and then we'll get back there. Next, moving on back over here to the right and left thumbstick clicks for the click right there. Now these locations for the left hand here, and they're going to be the same on both thumbsticks, is going to be this contact point right here. That is going to be the contact point in which you're going to run a wire from there around the board over to your left thumbstick from this one, and then on your right thumbstick it'll be the same contact point right here, and you'll run a wire from there to the right thumbstick or RJ connector right there, and that's going to give your remap board the capability of your thumbstick clicks to move to a rear button on the controller on that. Now the LED, slightly trickier on that one. And what I like to do is I will run a wire. You run a wire from that to a connector on the upper board here. And let's go ahead and pop this off. And if you need to know to remove this, you just lift up on this, pull forward, and it'll pop right off. Take that sync button off so we don't lose that. Now as you're looking at the board right here, you're going to connect that LED to the top of this R5 connection right here. But because that is so incredibly small and difficult to solder to without messing that up, what I recommend doing is following this tracer, turns to the lights a little better there, is follow the R5, follow this tracer up to this point right here. And what you're going to do is take a small X-Acto knife and just very lightly scrape across that. See if we can get that on camera here. Take that and you will just very gently scrape across it to remove that layer of epoxy film or whatever it is that comes on these boards here. Almost got it. There we go. And you'll notice when you do that, it'll have a nice clean copper connection in order to solder that LED wire to right there. And the way I like to run it, and keep in mind also how these wires are run, and the reason being is when you assemble your controller, you don't want it to have any pinch points in the wires or anything like that it's gonna affect or harm. And the place that we usually run them is, if you look at the edge of the board, will be right here in this little notch right there, and as well on the other side. That will allow you to run the wires around the board in order to keep them out of the way and keep them away from your edge right here as much as possible for when it sits down on here inside the controller and is sitting around that. It keeps any wires from sitting in here, rubbing together, getting pinched, split, broke, anything like that in the future. So I highly recommend running it around the edges here. That's the way we install our boards. Let's see, where were we? Lost my train of thought. Okay, so after you've run a wire from the LED connector right here to the contact point above the R5 spot there, again, you'll just follow that tracer up and it'll be right there. Put some solder on that, and then you'll solder a wire to that. Now, this will also be the last connection that you want to solder to during this installation. And the reason being is, after this board is installed back and all of your wires are on it, it's sitting in there and it's installed, that's when you're going to want the wire to come out here and go up and solder to that point. Otherwise, if you solder to it before, I mean, it's just kind of a mess, because then you're tethered to your other board and the rest of your controller. So save that one for the very last step as far as the soldering and stuff goes. And we're going to solder those up right quick, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back after we got everything installed and all of it wired up here. So I'll run you through this and show you exactly what we did here on the B button here. Move the LED wire out of the way. On the B button, we've run a wire from there, tracing it along the top. And we'll zoom in here and show you connected it to the top contact there. And if you'll notice, there's no solder or anything like that in between the joints. So that's something, again, you definitely want to make sure there is no solder touching those two pins together or anything like that. Over here, we've connected the two switches, switch 1 and 2. We're just going to do 2 switches on this demonstration. The current controller we're building has 2 switches, so figured it would work out pretty well, but I'll also show you how to wire up 4 switches. And later on in the video, we'll show you where to place those switches and etc., etc. From that, what we've done, moving over to the back side of the board here, connected 1 ground wire and run it along the back side. Now, normally we hot glue these wires down to keep them from moving, to keep them stationary in the controller. That way, if you drop it or anything like that, it's not going to want to break the contacts. Kind of gives it a little more durability, if you will, and keeps the wires where they're supposed to be. But I haven't done that yet. Saving that for later, and that way you can get a good idea from what everything is like and where it's all supposed to be. So we've run that ground wire there, and we've come across here, and we have come down here, the wiring harness here that we made, and you'll notice we have 1 ground wire here. As you trace it down, you'll notice that we have another ground wire spliced into that to connect to the other switch. And then we've connected these two ground wires and spliced them onto this board, and it is the ground wire coming off of your switch and coming from the back of the board to the grounding point, as well as your thumbstick clicks. You'll notice here, the pointers, we can show a little better here. You'll notice that right here and right there, we've gone ahead and soldered those on and brought those around there and connected to the left joystick and the right joystick there. And that's how pretty much all the wires are connected. Now your LED wire, again, that'll be the last wire you connect in installing this Arsenal Mod Arsenal 1 clipboard. It's been soldered there, and I've left it loose. You won't need, it's about 3.5 inches of wire. Now you will not need this much for the installation, but I would rather have more than enough and cut it off than cut it too short, and after you've already put the board together and then you have to go back, etc., etc. So that's never fun to have to take it back apart because the wire is too short. So make sure it's plenty long. Like I said, about 3.5 inches would be plenty for that. So we've got all of this wired up. We've got all of our contacts that we've covered and soldered here on the J5 and J6 connectors. We have everything connected here. Now we're to the point to where we have to connect our switches. So we will be right back. And as I was just showing you the layout of all of the wiring and the diagram of everything, all of the connectors on the J5 and J6 connector respectively, all the contacts that were soldered on there. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the actual installation of the LED wire. And as I showed you previously in the video, you will connect it right here to this contact that says LED right there, which I had showed that previously, but never a bad idea to go back over it. And again, this wire is, you know, I cut it way too long. It's about 4.5 inches right now. You really only need about 3.5, maybe not even that much. But better safe than sorry on that. So what we're going to do here, the way I would state one thing here, typically what I would recommend doing if you are installing this at home, if you don't have a good set of helping hands, a good circuit board holder, or anything like that, I would go ahead and install your upper board here. Make sure it is installed in the frame of the controller because it will allow you to have a little weight behind it. It won't want to sit there and move around as much and kind of give you a fairly decent little platform to do the soldering and everything on. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and connect this to the lower board. And what you're going to want to do is flip it over and you'll line up those connectors, and I'll spin this around here so you can see down in it. And you can see the J6 and J5 connector there. Line it up, make sure it's good and straight on there, and then just directly above it, kind of give it a little push right on top of it. You don't want to push way over here to the edge. You don't want to push way down here or anything like that. If you try to force it too much, you actually can rip the connectors right off the lower board. So don't be too delicate, but don't be too rough either. Now, with it being in the circuit board holder here and not being in that, it'll give us a little better view for the installation procedure. And here's your LED wire, and we'll show you right here where it's being soldered to. And as I stated previously, you can go to this contact right here. In fact, let me bring it up to the camera so you can see it a little better. You can go to this contact right here, or you can solder it to the top part of the R5 connection, which is this little resistor right here. You'll connect it to the top portion of that. Now you can do either or, it depends on what you're comfortable with. Sometimes these kind of hard to get the solder to stick to them if you don't have your temperature set just right on your soldering iron and don't have the right kind of solder or flux or anything. It can kind of be finicky. So we're going to go ahead and for this installation, I changed my mind on it. Said we were going to connect it here, but we're going to go ahead and connect it to the top of that resistor. It's a little easier for the beginner to do. Now, I will say before you do that, if you're using an adjustable temperature soldering iron, make sure your temperature isn't too extremely hot. If you get up 600-700 degrees, something like that, it'll actually heat that resistor up so quick that the entire thing will just pop right off the board. And trust me when I say you do not want that to happen. If that happens, your board's going to be pretty much toast. It's very difficult to solder them back on for a beginner, so I would definitely be careful on that. This is actually one of the more intricate portions of the Arsenal One clipboard install here, that it does have to have a little bit of finesse to it. Now, if you do decide to go the route of connecting it to the contact above it, what it will come just like these other contacts with a little bit of a kind of an epoxy type coating, which is on the PCB there, and you're going to want to scrape that off to a clean copper contact. Now, what I use an X-Acto knife with a curved blade like that. I recommend that because it gives it more of a flat curvature to scrape with. If you tend to try and do it with something like this, if you go in too pointed, you can actually cut and damage that contact. Cut it up too much, rip it right off the board, in which case your upper board is now toast and you need another one, and they're not extremely cheap to replace. Typically it's better just buy another controller. So I definitely recommend something like that. Round it off, and you'll just very gently, can't emphasize that enough, you'll put the very tip of it there, and you'll just very, very lightly scrape. Do it down here and then bring it up to the camera to show you the end results. Blow that off there. Okay. Come up there and see if I can get it turned right in the light here. You see right there, it's a pretty nice clean copper contact. And if you don't do that, then the solder is most definitely never going to stick on that. If you leave that epoxy coating on there, it's just kind of a impossibility, to say the least. So, now that all of that information is out of the way, what you're going to want to do with this wire is I typically like to run it right along the edge here, between your two contacts here. You can't really see in the camera because my fingers are in the way. These two contacts right here, the edge of the board, it's, you know, an 1/8, 3/16 of an inch off the side of the board there. And what I'll do is I'll run it up along the edge there, and I tend to grab it with a pair of tweezers, kind of get a nice little angle bent over, and get a decent, you know, positioning. It doesn't have to be an exact one or anything like that. And once you get it there, just mark where you want to cut it there, and cut that off, and then you're going to want to strip that wire back. So say we're going to go to that resistor there, so we'll just cut that off. And something on this too, you don't want to strip a whole lot of the wire off. You know, a 1/16 of an inch. That's about all you really want. This is small 30 gauge wire. It's not very big at all. And because you're soldering to such an extremely small contact, I will bring that up there to show you. That's about all the insulation you need to strip off of it. And really, you don't even need to take that much off. That's going to be 2-3 times the width of what that resistor is in and of itself. So it's not extremely critical, but you don't want it long enough that it's going to be touching anything else on the board. Now, something that I will recommend doing, retin the soldering tip here for just a second. I know, Ducky, why didn't you have that done beforehand? Well, I did. It's been sitting there while I've been talking. So what I do is come up with your soldering iron just at the very end, throw some solder on it. Well, if I can get it to be still here, and just kind of tin the tip of that wire a little bit. And by doing that, it'll cause it to actually turn around and stick to the solder that's actually on the board there. I'm going to flip this around just for ease of access here. And as I said, this is where it kind of gets to be a little bit on the delicate side of things. And you're going to put that right there. And you're going to solder it on just like that. Need to turn the heat up on the soldering iron slightly there. Tick, 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 tick. I'll get there eventually. Come back in and see how it just kind of popped off there. It wasn't really hot enough to melt and get a good solder joint there to it. There we go. I'll bring that up as close as I can to the camera there. See if we can get it to focus. And there we go. And you can see it's installed on the top of that resistor. And that is all you have to do in order to install the LED wire. Now, at this point, you can go ahead and completely, for the most part, reinstall all of your parts on the frame. Now, all of your ABXY buttons, D-pad, thumbsticks, etc., etc. I would leave the thumbsticks off temporarily, just so when you set the faceplate down in the frame, it's not sitting there flip-flopping and tumbling around and whatnot. So now we're going to move on to actually soldering up the switches, so we will be right back when we get all that set up. Okay, so we're back, and before we actually do the we're going to do the installation of the buttons here, show you how to place those, how to measure for those, where to put those, before we actually do the soldering and everything, because, well, if you did, it really wouldn't work that well. So the first thing I want to say, first and foremost, when you are installing the rear tack switches in the back shell, the rear shell of your controller, there is no, and I can't really emphasize this enough, there is no correct button position. There is no correct place to put them. Like if you put them here, is it going to be wrong? If you turn around and if you put them up here, is it going to be wrong? If you put them down here where your ring fingers are, is it going to be wrong? Absolutely not. And the reason that I say that, some people say, oh, well, you have to put them right here. Well, you don't. The reason is because everybody's hand is different. Everybody's hand size is different. And on top of that, everyone holds their controller just a little bit different. So what I recommend highly, even before, if you wanted to, you disassemble the controller, is hold the controller in your hands and determine, if you're, most people typically use their middle fingers, and determine where your middle finger sits, just in a nice, comfortable, rested position. Say you go into a Call of Duty game or something, and you just log in and just grab it up like you're just going to play and sit there and hold it, and then just flip it over and kind of see where the pads of your middle fingers are sitting. Or if you want it on your ring finger, see where the pad of your ring finger is sitting, and kind of mark it in that location. Now, we install our buttons evenly on either side. I've had some customers come up and say, hey, Ducky, can you take in and make the left one just slightly higher than the right one due to the thumbstick being higher on the controller? Sure, no problem. That's not a problem at all, because it should be fit to the individual. It should be fit to you. So with that being said, I'll show you some quick and easy ways here to kind of measure this out. Couple things you're going to need. Well, not necessarily need. You will need some Scotch tape. You can use the 3/4 inch. You can use the 1/2 inch, whatever you have laying around. But this works absolutely excellent. Preferably with a satin finish. It's a little easier to see, a little easier to draw on. And secondly, you're going to not necessarily need, but it definitely helps, a set of digital calipers. You can pick these up for about 20 bucks at places like Harbor Freight, or I believe I got these for $25 at Radio Shack. They're not too much. If you're going to use them for anything else, it's, we do this all the time, so it was definitely a very wise investment, because I like making sure the buttons are precisely placed in all of our controllers. And I highly recommend you do the same. Is it absolutely necessary? No, but I would recommend it. Now, with that being said, what you're going to want to do is, first off, you're going to kind of want to get an idea of where you're going to want those buttons drawn. And I would recommend just take a mechanical pencil or a number 2 pencil and draw a small dot. Very small, not even a 1/16 of an inch. Something so that when you actually drill the hole, the full-size hole through the controller, it will take that marking out. That way you're not going to be sitting there looking at it. Do that, do that, and after you've kind of got an idea of where that's at, before you go to drilling, before you go to marking, and before you go to measuring, if you are going to measure and do those evenly on the sides, get you some tape, about a, I don't know, 6-7 inch piece, about the width of the controller. And what I'll do is I usually flip the shell upside down, take the tape, and I typically try to do as best as we can in the frame here. Typically I try to line it up in the center of that notch, and it depends. If you're using 1/2-inch tape and say you want it lined up with that, well, you can put just a very slight overhang up here of the battery compartment. It'll line up perfectly. Or if you want to just go the width of the tape off the edge of the battery compartment, you can do that too. The reason we put the tape on here is partially for lineup purposes, but mostly so you're not sitting there drawing all over your controller shell going, well, I wonder if that would work. Oh, no, it won't. And then when you get done, you've got marks everywhere that you're sitting there trying to scrub or get off. Either that or you're just stuck with them. Particularly on a light colored shell like this, you don't want marks all over it. Now, after you've done that, I would recommend, and this is just something the way we measure with the calipers, is I will come along the inside edge here and I'll just trim that off. Just get that out of the way. Do you have to? No, you don't. It's just something I like to do. Oh, now let's see if I can get it apart without it sticking to everything, as Scotch tape has a tendency to do. Okay, finally. Okay. Now, after it's set up like that, this customer's controller here, I'd actually previously measured it on the calipers to determine the exact distance off that they wanted it. And the way I use these is I will go off the very end here and I will measure in and just kind of put a little bit of pressure and twist just a little bit. And you can see, I can get it turned right here, you can see right there, there's a very just slight indentation in the tape. Didn't get into the shell, didn't cut through the tape or anything, just enough to kind of make a mark there. And then I'll turn around and do the same thing with the other side. I know this is kind of getting out of focus on the camera here, so I apologize for that. Okay, and we position our buttons. This is actually where this customer wanted theirs. We usually go about 1/2 inch off of this. About 1/2 inch off of this rail here. Show you that. Adjust the calipers. Here. And you'll notice these little studs right here on the inside. What we'll do is we'll go to the inside of that, come down to the distance and that was located at, make another little indentation in the tape, turn around, do the exact same thing, make another indentation in the tape. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a little pin vise. Is this necessary? No, it's not necessary, but it's a lot easier than using an electric cordless drill. And what we're going to do is we're going to line this up here. And slowly go through that while the tape's still on there. This happens to be a painted and polished shell, so it also kind of helps you from sitting there eating up the paint as you're starting to drill it. And just to double check our measurements before we go forward to the other side, just in case your drill was slightly off or your mark was slightly off, we'll do that, and then we'll come over here and recheck that side. Double check it. Remember, folks, measure twice, drill once. It'll save you a lot of headache. No doubt about it. So we'll measure that, make sure we've still got the same distance there. And we will drill a hole through that. Now, the way I recommend drilling these holes, if you look at the placement of the battery cover here, try to keep the bit as square, as parallel to that edge as absolutely possible. Is it going to be perfect? No, and it doesn't matter with the pilot hole, but it will matter when you actually drill the larger hole. Due to the kind of the curvature of the inside of the controllers and stuff, it will make a difference, so you definitely want to pay attention to that. Now, after we've got those done, we're going to go ahead and drill the bigger holes, which is simply doing the same thing we did here. And we're going to go ahead and do that off camera, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We went ahead and installed the buttons, glued them in place, and also went ahead and soldered the wiring harness to them as well. It'd be easier to demonstrate it this way than trying to sit there and solder under the camera. What you need to do is you need to make a note of the location. Now, each tack switch that you get, we use a different tack switch than Arsenal Mod. They use a 12x12, we use a 6x6 tack, but either way you're going to have markings on the rear of it. And it's best to make these facing the same direction. Ours, for example, has DIP on one side of it, so we put DIP facing the bottom on this one, and on this one DIP is facing the top, and that's so that your ground wires can actually connect to the same pole, and then your power wires will connect to the opposite pole, and that allows you to wire, instead of having to run a ground wire from this switch back to the board and then from this switch back to the board, it allows you to run one single ground wire all the way through. A lot simpler, a lot cleaner installation. Now what you want to do when you do solder these, you want to make sure you go diagonal on them, and I believe the Arsenal Mod tack switches that they sell on their website are the same setup as these, but you do want to go diagonally to those. Now when you look at them, you don't want to go to the sides like this. So you definitely want to go diagonally, and that will allow it to cross over in there. Now, if you go both sides here, some switches work like that, some switches don't, just kind of depends, but a good practice is to go diagonally. Now that those are done, I also told you that I was going to show you how to install 4 buttons, and it's actually extremely simple. What you'll do, say, for example, you have another button right here. What you're going to do is the pole in which this is connected to, your ground wire, and that's why this is so important, particularly if you're installing more than 2 buttons. You can run a jumper wire from the ground pole of your 4th switch to the opposite ground pole. So, for example, this is our ground pole here. This contact right here is going to be ground as well. So if you have your other switch here, you simply run a jumper wire from this switch over to the grounding pole of this switch, and you'll do the same, rinse and repeat on the other side. And what that's going to allow you to do, for example, on this side, if you had it here, you would run it here. This one's connected here. She goes straight across, and it would be connected to that pole right there. And that will allow you to have 4 switches but 1 common ground. So that'll eliminate a lot of extra wiring, a lot of extra hassle on the installation of this. After you've installed that, you simply reassemble the controller, because the installation of the Arsenal Mod clipboard is complete at this point. One other thing that I do want to mention that I kind of missed on a few minutes ago in the video. When I said this upper board, when we were wiring the LED up to the rear, I've actually desoldered it here. You have to do that when it's in the shell. You have to do it when it's in the frame. Again, I stated that I did it outside of it strictly for demonstration purposes and for a better view, but you have to install that once that is actually screwed down to the frame. Otherwise, you will not be able to get to the screw holes underneath it to screw the entire thing back down on the frame. So you definitely want to make sure that's screwed down in its entirety before you solder that LED wire on. Also, if you're installing the extra 2 switches, I will touch on this one thing real quick. If you're installing the extra 2 switches, you will have an extra power wire going from each switch, in which those will come back and attach to the switch 3 and switch 4 positions on the board. Go ahead and take this upper board off just to give you a good visualization of it. We'll get that up here. So on your 3rd and 4th switch, you will connect those to switch 3 and switch 4. And again, as I stated previously in the video, I will reiterate that point. You don't have to keep track of which switch is going to which contact here. That is the excellent thing about the Arsenal Mod Remap board, is that you do not have to have switch 1 necessarily to switch 1. You can have the switch 1 contact to switch 4, the switch 3 to switch 2. It doesn't matter, because it's all going to function the same either way. So that is irrelevant as long as all of the power wires are connected to those switch contacts. That's all you need to do. We're going to go ahead and reassemble this controller right quick. We're going to do that off camera to save time because it's simply the reverse of the disassembly. So we'll get that all done and we will be back. Okay, so we're going to start the reassembly process of the controller here. I was going to do it off camera and everything to save a little bit of time. However, there's a couple of things I do want to touch on with the 3.5 millimeter headset port. I do want to touch on that because it is different than the traditional controller as far as reassembly goes. Also, there's one more thing I want to touch on during the reassembly, which we'll primarily focus on, is the new guide button setup. This is actually one of our brand new 3.5 millimeter pink part sets just in. We're going to be installing that on this controller, but the installation is slightly more tricky than the disassembly. So we'll show you how to do that. Now, just for sake of ease, I guess you could say, I left the LED power wire unsoldered just so I can show you the frame in its entirety. So what you're going to be looking at is, you should have it this far here. Now, when you actually go to reinstall the board, you will slip this in, but there's one important thing to do. Almost forgot. On this 3.5 millimeter controller, when you disassemble it, there's the 3.5 millimeter headset jack. Do not want to forget that. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to slide this in, this notch right here on the frame. It will go facing down with the contacts facing up. So it'll assemble just like that. You're going to leave that in place, leave that flat, and then as you put the lower board in and snap into it into its position. Also on these trigger wires here, make sure they're fully out from underneath the board. Sometimes they can get caught underneath it and it'll pinch them, and sometimes it'll actually pinch them in two. And you'll click that down. Now, excuse me, if you'll look right here, there is going to be a small stud on the back of that headset port, which is going to line up in that hole, which will allow all those contacts to line up, and it will wobble, it will move a little bit. That's perfectly normal, so nothing to be worried about there. After you've snapped the board back in place there, you will want to reinstall and get in the light so you can see the two screws, one here, as well as the other one down here on this bottom corner. Now, for the reinstallation of the bumper assembly on these new controllers, previously they had two studs on top and the bumpers were a separate piece. On these new ones, they are all one piece. So I'm actually going to take this board and headset adapter off to be able to show you a little better here on how to install it. Now, what you're going to want to do is you'll notice right here on the back, this piece right there, and that piece right there. Those are actually what are going to make contact with your two tact switches. And I'll turn this up here. I'll see if I can get it to focus in. Right in here, in this one little groove, that is where those two pieces are going to fit. Now, if you try to simply just put this on and don't line them up, it's not going to work. What I do is take your ring fingers and kind of hold the triggers back a little bit and hold this, and you'll kind of go up at an angle to it like that. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to reach over with your thumb and index finger and bend as you get it kind of close. See if you can see in there. You'll want to actually twist it just a little bit and get it to slide in there. And then you want to do the exact same thing to the other side. Now, when those are in there, you'll push the bottom of the guide plate right in here. You'll kind of push that in. And these can definitely be a little bit on the tricky side. And once you've got that in, you will push the guide button in, such as that. Push it over until your guide button snaps up through the guide plate. And then you'll want to simply kind of press and slide those into place. And as you can see, I didn't get this one in all the way, so we will go back and make sure that is in there. As I said, they can most definitely be kind of tricky sometimes to get in on these newer controllers. Being an all one-piece assembly where the guide plate and bumpers all have to connect together it can give you a little hassle, but just remember, don't try to force it. If you try to force it, you can definitely break those smaller tabs off. And I'll see if I can get as good a shot as I can here. If you can kind of see down in there where it's making contact with the tack switch and where it has gone through that. I don't know if you can see that or not, but okay, so now that that's installed, all of the buttons are installed. This is a full pink part set that we're doing on this particular controller. We will go back and do what we were doing before. Now, after you get to that point on that, and to where we were already at here, there's a couple of things you're going to want to do, and that's going to be solder your rumbles back together, or back onto the board, should I say. You're definitely going to want to make sure you get them in the right order. And on these newer boards, it's so nice the way Microsoft added this, and it was on the older boards too, but they improved on this slightly. Your upper two contacts here, which are going to be right here and right here, your SO5 spots, and you will have a positive and a negative sign there. Now, the gray wire is going to be the positive wire, the black wire is going to be the negative wire, and then when you install your larger grip rumbles, will be on these two connections here, which are going to be, actually, correction, that's SO5, SO6, SO7, and SO8. So those will be right there. Again, positive on top, negative on the bottom. For your other rumbles, your grip rumbles, they have a red and black wire, red being positive and black being negative. Now, if you haven't kept track, like I did on numerous builds in the beginning, which rumble came out of which grip, you're going to get to this point and go, okay, I don't remember. Well, that's okay, because we're going to show you how to do that. And something I always like to remember is if your controller, if you're looking at the board and you're looking at it like this, okay, that smaller rumble is going to be on the left-hand side. As you're holding the controller over, that smaller rumble will be in your right hand. The larger rumble will be in your left hand, which, when it's turned over this way, will be on the right side. Now, after you've done that, and after you've installed everything there, assembly from this point forward is rather straightforward. What you'll do is make sure your two contacts for the battery posts here, you will make sure those are in, and you will, before you try to press it down, you will actually give the triggers a squeeze so that they will clear, and you'll push it down in there. You can't push this one all the way down yet. Don't have the hole for the 3.5 millimeter headset port. Still got to drill that out. So once you get to this point, simply slide your thumbsticks back on over the top, and then you simply place your faceplate back on. It'll fit right over everything. After you do that, hold your faceplate in the middle and go back and hold it in the back of the controller. Simply reinstall the 5 T8 Torx screws that came out, 2 on each grip here, there, on the other side, and then 1 in your battery compartment. After you've done that, the controller should be completely assembled from that point forward, and you've just completed the Arsenal Mod Arsenal 1 Remap board install. I hope this video has been extremely informative for you today. I hope it really helped you out on the installation portion of it. If you have any questions regarding anything in this video or anything in regards to the Arsenal 1 clipboard, you can feel free to message Amir at Arsenal Mod at info@arsenalmod.com, or you can email me at info@duckycustoms.com. Either one of us can help you out with the install here. So hope it's been informative and hope your installation goes well. Have a good one.